Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. How do you help a company grow fast without losing what makes it special? What's the secret to navigating big changes like merging teams or restructuring? Today, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Jules Siegel-Hawley today, who works hands-on with organizations to tackle challenges like these and build strong, adaptable teams. Now, Jules is founder and principal consultant at Andes, and she's a senior strategic advisory role at Medicine Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders. Jules has a fascinating career leading organizational transformations for high-growth companies and evolving enterprise, focusing on designing scalable people systems. Her work includes organization design, people strategy, and post-acquisition integration. Previously, she's worked at Tegria, which is a global healthcare consulting and services company, as Vice President of Organization Transformation and Development. And so she has a fascinating background. And even more fascinating is that she started a career in clinical social work in the US, where she has a Master's of Social Work from Columbia University. And this has given her a unique perspective and approach to her work, which we'll explore in more detail today. And Jules is a truly global cosmopolitan traveler. She splits her time between New York and Europe and is currently based in Brussels. So thank you so much for making time today, Jules. We're absolutely delighted that you can join us.
I'm thrilled to be here, and I loved that introduction. Thank you so much.
Brilliant to have you with us. We're really excited about this conversation. So just to kick us off, just tell us a bit about the work that you do.
Everything has an organization transformation bent to it, I would say. And how I really break that down is it's organization design, people strategy, and then looking at the change leadership that ties it all together, because there's a lot of change that comes with this stuff. More recently, I've been working in the learning and development space at Doctors Without Borders, which has been really fascinating. I support with the design and implementation of the medical and operations trainings for our field staff. So that's been kind of a steady focus and a constant. I also support external clients as part of Andes, working with org design and org transformation. My bread and butter, I like to say, is job architecture, which is really the fundamental layer of org design. It's kind of the nitty-gritty technical part where you're looking at roles, core accountabilities, compensation strategy, etc. Once you have that in place, you can build and get more innovative, looking at performance management, employee engagement, employee onboarding, all that other stuff. So I think of org design as that job architecture piece, and then I think of people strategy as what you're able to build on top of it. And so that's something I'm kind of working with quite a few clients at the moment, helping them in various phases of their growth and of their evolution. I like to say, I think that transformation can sometimes scare people. So their evolution.
Yeah, it's a big word, isn't it? Transformation.
It is.
Another particular type, when the work with Andes, is there a particular type of sector that you work in or types of organizations?
Like you said, I got my start in the humanitarian space and was working internationally. I'm obsessed with this concept of implementing, or I guess defining and implementing a common vision across disparate contexts. So the humanitarian space was great to do that because you have these global contexts and everything is just, so that was really cool. I discovered the tech startup space when I was working at Tegria. We were merging about 6 or 7 tech startups together into one company. And that's where I realized that I had found my people, because it actually there was such symmetry. A parallel can be drawn between the work at Doctors Without Borders, where you're really building something from nothing. You're kind of saying, F all of this red tape. We're just going to make this thing happen. Give me a Q-tip and a rock. Let's go. And I felt the same energy and the same creativity when I was working with the tech startup people. And so that is what I've been gravitating toward in my Andes work, my brand, to really be focusing on those, I say Series A, Series B companies that are looking to scale quickly and reinforce or build out entirely their people infrastructure.
Brilliant. And I love the parallels between the two contexts, which
it
might feel really different,
totally
you explained.
So different, but it's sort of it's creativity is like at the root of it, and sort of a dreamer mindset.
Because you're working with different kind of people in different tech startup spaces. Do you see like a common theme between them? Are they facing the same challenges?
Yes. I mean, they're all looking to scale up quickly. A lot of times they, have been very organic in their growth. And so they're often really looking for that HR, it's a dirty word, expertise, that people strategy expertise to come in and really help them and reassure them, here's what you need to do, X, Y, and Z. I think that there's often, I would say, a theme that I feel is like this angst and then avoidance around the kind of legal aspects, the compliance aspects that come with this kind of work. And so they actually just don't bother with it. And they don't know how to have these conversations either. It just feels very hot button. And so that's one of the things that I'm constantly doing. I would say no matter what we're talking about, there's always, I'm kind of reassuring and like providing a template and a roadmap for how do we get you on the road to compliance? How do we make this into a healthy organization where you're not avoiding these conversations and then just letting things grow organically? That's literally a silver thread or a golden thread through everything.
So we're actually recording this interview. In the UK, it's business planning season now. So the organisation should have really started a couple of months earlier, now starting to get really into it. And the one constant about most strategies or business plans, whichever way you look at it, is about getting bigger and scaling. Very few business plans forecast a loss ever. What do organisations get wrong about scaling? Because it's such a seductive word, isn't it? Like we want to be bigger, but where does it start? Where does it start to go wrong, or where can this company start to get it right?
So I would say it's crucial in general, but in this, as an answer to this question for sure, to have a robust strategy that you're going to use as your foundation to then scale from. Like you're not just scaling to scale. And I find that often I come in and they have maybe a windfall or it's usually they've gotten some kind of cash infusion that they're looking to scale up and they have investors and they need to demonstrate that they are growing, that this is happening. So I would say business strategy is really the input that a lot of people are missing. But I would also say it's about the people infrastructure. So it's not just about going and hiring a bunch of people and bringing them on board. There really needs to be intentionality behind the thing. There needs to be, dare I say, a journey that these newcomers are gonna be embarking on with you as a company. And so for me, it really starts at that micro level, the job architecture, making sure that you have the roles and clear accountabilities in place, that your teams are able to have the conversations around how to onboard, how to keep your employees engaged, and really make sure that they can tie what every individual is doing back up to that bigger picture strategy. You really want to create a cohesive whole. And so often what we see is people kind of stepping out in silos, moving fast and breaking stuff, which I'm like all for coming from where I come from. But actually, I'm quite meticulous in that there's a real template that needs to be followed to ensure that we're doing this in a safe and effective way.
In the pre-meet we spoke, you talked about often with these new startups, they feel like they're stuck and everything feels urgent and it's like, where do we go next? The world's on fire. Where do we start?
100%. Well, that comes up all of the time for sure. And so it's basically you're moving too fast to be able to do things in an intentional way. And actually you're just creating more mess. And I've seen it again and again. And really the big thing for me is making sure that there's a really clear business strategy. That's what I do. But like without that, you're not tied to anything. Nothing ties back up to the overall purpose. And then people it falls apart. The bottom of the cake falls through. It's like we're missing the flour.
How do you get people to slow down? Because you said moving too fast. We see it all the time in the work we do. And there's almost this resistance to slowing down. It's like, no, we need to keep going. We need to go. How do you get people to slow down to do the thinking?
Yes, that's one of the bigger challenges of the job, I would say, especially because often the people side of this is seen, I don't want to be incendiary, but it's a little bit more of an afterthought. We need to get our revenue up. We need to, expand it to emerging markets, all this kind of jargon comes into play. And then I come in as the cool strategic people person, not the HR girl. And it's really a conversation where I have to be incredibly thoughtful and clear what the next steps are. I have to be really tactical. I can't be talking about journeys. Let me say that. It has to be like, okay, in order to do this, we need to do that. And often it's a really fine line to walk because they want to move fast. And so I try to also, and time has helped and experience has helped me to really say, okay, this is the core of what needs to happen. And here's how I can get you from A to B without everyone crossing the finish line, bleeding and bruised, but from A to B in this amount of time. And so it might even be, it's one of the bigger challenges that I face. And I've been playing a lot with different engagement models that could actually like help to get people bought into what I'm selling, basically. And so it's really about coming in and being able to demonstrate value quickly, finding out what are the quick wins, and then putting together a detailed yet simple kind of framework for how we're going to be moving forward. And here's what you're going to get at each key milestone. So being super practical, super tactical, and then also selling kind of the vision behind the thing. But I will say it's one of the bigger challenges of the role.
That's so interesting. And you picked on something which is just a perennial issue for HR, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dan and I were literally talking just before the call with a company we just started working with. And, the people strategy has been written for HR to then go and act rather than sort of engaging in the process. And what you're inviting them to do is quite a change. How does an organization know that they need someone like you in there to come in and do a thing? Because you're really going to provide structure. You're going to build the chassis for which to do the work in, aren't you?
Yeah. Usually it's when an organization has gotten into trouble and they...
I know you're going to say that.
Like the compliance piece has reared its ugly head. It's also so far been word of mouth. Like people know me, they know what I can do. They've worked with me in the past. Like I've made some pretty good networking contacts just with the diverse people that I've worked with. But I'm trying to get the word out more, let me just say, because it's not top of mind to call me in. But I can tell you that if there's been an incident, some kind of legal compliance incident, that's definitely a trigger. And then really by just trying to get with people in the tech startup space, I've been making connections and people are like, oh, you should think about this person. One of the models that I'm looking at is because I recognize that that this stuff is kind of scary for people. And it's like, again, it's talking about transformation. And it's like, is it transformation? Is it evolution? I'm trying to sell myself more as like a fractional CHRO support or like strategic transformation person, but coming in as more of a fractional embedded member of their leadership team. You get this expertise for the cost of an analyst, let's say, and we can set really clear timelines that there's flexibility for them. They don't feel like they're overcommitting to something. And I'm very flexible, like I was saying, in how we structure the engagement. So we could do things from, okay, you want to reinforce your job architecture, you want to build a compensation strategy, and you want to stand up a corresponding performance management program. Those are 3 distinct modules. We can do them one module over the course of 3 months. We can stop, reassess, see where we are. So I'm really trying to break things down into digestible chunks for those that really are kind of on the fence or feeling like, I don't know, I don't want to spend money on something I'm not sure what I'm getting into. Other model that I'm really interested in that I was talking about is the fractional leadership model. And that would be more like an annual contract. We come in, we develop your people strategy for the year, and I help execute on that strategy. And usually I would be partnering with your people director or your people team that's already in place, doing a strategic advisory, kind of reinforcing, making sure that they're all on track, providing consulting, coaching support for key leaders, things like this. It's hard. It's really trying to, it's definitely a space you sort of have to claw your way into. And so I'm trying to figure out what works and what is like the least intimidating for people. And so for now, I'm just staying super flexible and seeing what strikes people, but what sticks.
Because we love definition on this, because I think there's so many words out there that we don't truly have an agreement about what they mean. And for you, what does job architecture mean to you? Like what does it actually entail?
Yeah. So I got into job architecture through Doctors Without Borders, and I was an implementer of this new job architecture that they came out with, that Korn Ferry came in and supported them in designing. For me, job architecture is the role with the core accountabilities that falls into a standard leveling framework with a common language to accompany each level. So how I would say it with Doctors Without Borders, because I had to explain this a lot, was you would have a nurse in Malawi, a nurse in Ukraine, a nurse in Lebanon, a nurse in Chad. And they would all be called different things, and they would all be at different levels. And they would all have different accountabilities, or maybe they would have the same accountabilities, but there wasn't a cohesive common language. So that when we talked about a nurse, we all knew this is what we're talking about. And so the idea was to implement that. And so we came up with core role profile for a nurse, slotted them into a level 5, level 6 on our function grid, on the like leveling framework. And then from there, once you have that in place with the role profile given to the person, new contract, etc., you're able to do so much when it comes to compensation equity, when it comes to performance management, when it comes to upskilling and development, which ties to the performance management. And then really when, like, if you think about it from a strategic headquarters perspective, you can do so much more in terms of the analytics of workforce planning and making sure that you have the right people in the right places, identifying gaps. Your reporting just like enhances so much overnight because we're all speaking a common language. So for me, it's the foundation of what needs to be in place to really have a compelling org design infrastructure. It's the foundation.
So I guess we're really curious about your journey into your role. And I guess one of the things we're really curious about is like your social work background and how that's informed your work as well. So what has been your process today?
I went to Columbia I graduated 12 or 13 years ago at this point, and I actually did clinical social work. I was working with patients. I was really interested in healthcare. So I was working in a hospital setting by my second year, really fascinated with the healthcare system and how it impacted individual lives. And what I realized through that program was that I was always looking to influence the system that surrounded whatever problem the person that I was meeting with was facing. And so I realized that as much as I loved the micro and that was sort of like a kind of easy for me, really, I had this fascination with complex systems and how that would impact the micro, like I just said. So when I left Columbia, my first job out of school was with Doctors Without Borders, which was a dream organization. And I will just say, I started at the lowest rung of the totem pole ever. I was an admin assistant in their travel department. So I was like sending people to Chad, to Jordan, to Afghanistan. I was booking the flights and doing the visas. That was my first role.
And what is Doctors Without Borders? So some people will be familiar with the organization, but maybe not fully get what the work is that they do.
So Doctors Without Borders is a leading humanitarian organization. It operates in 70 plus countries worldwide. It was started by a group of French doctors in the 1970s. And they're really about getting access to healthcare no matter what, wherever you are in the world. Like that's the overarching mission. And so they send doctors from the West, but also we've been doing a big push to do more locally hired staff and get them trained up and really drawing from those resources, enhancing the capacity of people that are already on the ground so that we have more of a long-term support structure in place rather than these emergency interventions. But the idea is to provide access to quality healthcare wherever you are in the world for people who need it most.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just thought it's such a powerful organization.
I know. I mean, my mom was like, "Why are you taking this job?" And I was like, "Because it's an in. Like this organization." I just had stars in my eyes, and my plan worked. Let's just put it that way. Where really I was able to zigzag through the organization. There's a lot of different offices around the world, and there's a lot of needs. But I really discovered the organization design, organization development, organization transformation space. And I would say that my first real role within that space was this job architecture implementation role. I was called a mobile implementation officer, a MIO. And I will tell you, nobody else applied for the role. It was just me. And I was all about it. I ended up, it was to answer your question, so much of that role, I realized, like I learned all the technical stuff and I was able to simplify the language, create kind of a really clear description of this common logic, of the common vision. Why are we doing this? But so much of it had a clinical social work bent to it because it was a lot of just one-to-one conversations, explaining things, listening, really. Like, why I got into it is because it's the most sensitive conversation you can possibly have with anybody. I think I've said this to you before. You're talking about money, you're talking about power, you're talking about status level, and you're doing it across the globe. So working in Congo versus South Sudan, like very different contexts, very different cultures. And how do you have this conversation? How do you engage with people in a way that you can implement this safely and actually make it not a painful experience, but an empowering experience? And that was something that honestly came naturally to me because of my clinical social work background. I was not afraid of those conversations. And actually, it was like I just came in with a really open and earnest spirit and was really there to kind of guide people through this every step of the way. The critical piece of it, I think, would be casting that common vision, making sure that they understood why we were doing this, and then making sure that I shepherded them through the how every step of the way. And so we ended up rolling out this thing. I think I did 12 countries in about a year and a half. And it was very successful.
Obviously, you talked about the fact, because things like salary are the sacred cow in organizations. And often when organizations have been through it afterwards, it's quite liberating. But it's the thought of going through that and unearthing all the disparity and inequality and maybe all the secret deals that have been made to entice people in or retain them. I have no insight to it, but those are the kind of things that are hidden in the paste reward, aren't they? What can organizations do to lean into that? How has that social work or helped?
So I'll say that wasn't the case in the humanitarian space. It was more about not having that common language. And so it just it happened that people would have a different level or it's definitely a thing in the private tech startup space where you have your friends that come in and the founder. Definitely. I think it's the most sensitive part of it. And actually, maybe I should have started by saying this is basically when you're talking about job architecture, everybody knows that you're talking about money at the end of the day, because whatever role you're tied to on the function grid is going to link up to that role on the salary band or on the salary grid. They're two different grids distinctly, but they do meet at the very end. And this is something that I've had to explain to a lot of different people. I think when you can start to articulate what can be accomplished when you have this equitable structure and what you can do from a compensation strategy perspective, that's when you actually get into the ROI for these more business-minded people. Okay, here's, it's not just throwing spaghetti at the wall anymore. We can actually figure out a clear path for making things equitable, and then you can talk about that with your staff. But it's very sensitive, and honestly, it's different for everybody because everybody's going to be in a different place. But I would say it's very important that you train up your managers across the board on what this process looks like and equip them with just key talking points, because people are going to ask. They're not going to go to HR. Well, they will eventually, but they'll start with their manager. And what I've seen again and again is the managers do not know how to have the conversation, and they'll escalate it up to HR. And I think really a lot of calm could come from a manager that understands and buys into whatever system or strategy we're putting in place and can speak to the key talking points of it.
Because organizations are constantly lurching between centralized and decentralized. Sure. And it kind of, if you're in an organization long enough, you'll see the pendulum swing backwards and forwards.
Yep.
How do you, because you're in countries where there's for example, really high inflation and people's situations are all different. How do you get the balance right between centralize all those benefits there, but still give the latitude for managers or whatever to make local decisions? How does that get baked into it?
Yeah, I would say when we're in the humanitarian space, that process is definitely more of a centralized process. I see decisions get made on a local level. They'll actually play with the function grid, and they'll put someone at a higher level or a higher role than maybe they're prepared for, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm all for up leveling, this is fine. And I can also sometimes definitely say wait a minute, you're being sneaky. But I would say in that case, honestly, the compensation component is more of a central model. You do a benchmarking exercise every X amount of years, and people wait for that benchmark. I'll tell you that when I was implementing job architecture, the countries that we targeted first as our low-hanging fruit were those that were in need of a salary increase due to the latest benchmarking results. Much easier to communicate to people that you're a driver going from a level 4 to a level 3 if we say, but really that doesn't mean anything to your salary. You're actually going to go up in salary. That's a much easier conversation to have. And that was what the first wave really looked like, was targeted countries that needed a salary review.
An optional question for you. So you pass on this one. So we had someone on from the NHS. Obviously, the UK is our beloved institution, but it's so big. It's not like 1 million employees. And one of the things that they sort of found is that they have bands in there. And that where it's kind of challenged is that certain bands can do certain things, and so certain bands are excluded from certain meetings. How can organisations not create a them and us from this process?
I mean, the bands should speak to the market. Like, it should all be completely data-driven, and it should be the role with the core accountabilities tied, basically what it looks like, technical nitty-gritty, is we would create the job architecture. You would say, let's go back to the nurse at a level 5. I'm not going to benchmark and say, hey, other organizations in my sector and in my area, what do you pay your level 5s? No, the job architecture is an internal tool. That leveling framework is internal. I would say, hey, y'all, what are you paying your nurses? And then we would gather that information and we would come up with sort of what is the 25th percentile versus the 50th. We would create a salary band based on that data. So it's entirely data-driven and it's entirely connected to what that role is. But I think that it's crucial that people understand that there's real data-driven integrity behind the creation of those bands, and where it's an objective conversation. Is that answering your question?
Yeah. I guess sometimes it's like with the NHS, it's become almost like the status actually attached to the banding. So certain bands are then invited, but obviously that's a cultural, I think, it's an ongoing cultural challenge that they have within there.
Interesting. Yeah. No, so it's interesting because when I was in the US, there's this big push for salary transparency and making sure that when you publish a new job description, you publish the band, and people are getting around it by publishing these insane bands like $0 to $500,000, which is like, that's actually, I'm just thinking, I should target those people because they clearly need more job architecture support and compensation strategy support. But I would say that the salary band conversation is definitely a political one. And like I said, it's really the kind of black heart of the job architecture conversation because it's so intrinsically linked to it. And people, you have to demonstrate that you have a common logic for how you're leveling people. And that's like common work dimensions or common criteria that you're considering that you can speak to. And that the process of the matching of a person to whatever role they will have within that job architecture has been done with intentionality and is entirely fair. Then you have to explain that the salary bands that you've created for your salary grid are also following a similar process of data-driven integrity. But that's a lot to explain to people. And I will tell you, when you mention money, people see red and they actually can't really even engage with you. And so that's like my clinical social work thing. I'm like, they're not even able to process what I'm saying. And so how do we make it so that this is a clear and simple conversation where we explain all of this in a way that they can understand it? Really what I found was it was one-to-one conversations where I explained the same concepts in about 20 different ways, depending on who I was talking to. But that was what did it. So it's time intensive and I think energy intensive. You have to have kind of the right, and I will tell you that a lot of people don't have that energy. Or wherewithal to engage in those kinds of conversations. And so they'll just implement it in a very top-down way. And that's where you run into trouble because these are high-risk conversations. This is a high-risk exercise. You're looking at social, legal, and financial risk, which again is why organizations or startups kind of just avoid it and act like it's not there. And so, yeah, you have to have the right people in the room to facilitate this process.
So yes, you skip that at your peril, don't you? If you say, I'm not going to bother with one-to-ones, we haven't got time for that.
Right. I think, honestly, a real solution that's not focusing on one person, I was an implementer of this thing, so that was my clear role. But really, you should be training up your managers to understand the process and be able to have these conversations. But they'll be nervous about it. And I can talk more about how to prepare them, but it's definitely an education exercise. And providing them with the right tools and information to be able to do it well. They need to feel confident.
Yeah, I can imagine it just once it's actually done and the difficulty and the pain and the intent, it catapults the organization forward though, doesn't it? Because it's
unreal.
Such a cleaner and more clarified place. And
everything becomes so the chaos diffuses and the conversations become so much less subjective. And it becomes these objective, strategic conversations. And because what you're able to do when this is in place, let's talk about the performance management. Now we have core accountabilities. We have a data-driven approach to what you're supposed to be doing, right? And then you can attach that to competencies, which is another part of job architecture. So these are the competencies for this role. You should have a level 4 of this competency. You're only at a level 2. And so it really informs how managers should be engaging with their teams. It helps us to understand hot spots for upskilling. It's the world cracks wide open, and it's very exciting. And I'm speaking as a nerd with this stuff, but it's very exciting. Organizations come together and like start to embody this new infrastructure, and like it just takes a huge weight off of things. The transparency, like it's just, you can feel it. This is a equitable, fair organization. We stand on this infrastructure that we've built. And I'll say so much of like, that's the end product. I think that the process of implementing it, and this might be clear from how I've been talking, but the process of implementing it can actually be a unifying one and a healing one, something where you're really bringing the people together to build this thing together, to cast this vision together. And that's when we're talking about bringing in disparate companies to become one new company. This process should not be done behind closed doors with a bunch of consultants. It should be something that the managers and the leaders are actively engaged with, because one, that helps them to buy into the thing when they're implementing it. But it also is that collaborative process is really usually the first time that they're starting to come together as colleagues. So the process itself, I think, can be a healing one.
What do you enjoy most about the work that you do?
I like the creative thinking that you have to do. And I like having to put myself in people's shoes constantly when I think about how am I going to engage with this group of stakeholders versus this group of stakeholders, tailoring the message depending on the level that I'm speaking with or the profile that I'm speaking with, and then still making it all tie back to that common vision. That really just gets me excited. So I would say that piece. And then I also weirdly geek out about the technical stuff, but that's not as fun to talk about.
And what do you find most challenging?
So I'm an empathetic person. I think I can, and I've gotten so much better about this, you guys, but like I can absorb sometimes the energy. And I think that's not a problem when it became an issue when I started working with these big wig tech honchos, kind of very high level, very revenue driven. And there was just competing priorities. And usually I'm like very methodical and like able to sort of say, like, it's not my job to make a decision here. It's my job to facilitate, to tee up the decisions, to bring whatever the issue is to the steering committee, like, follow the process, follow the governance. I still can get kind of jarred by the competing priorities and the sort of energy that can accompany that at the highest level. And again, that's like me being quite vulnerable saying that, but that has been my biggest challenge and something that I've been working on.
Yeah, well, I think it's really empowering for people that are watching this because we intentionally set the podcast out so that people can see this work is not easy. And no matter how accomplished you are in your career, there are still things that we find difficult. There's still times when I'm like, Danny, I think I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. But I think there's strength in being able to recognize that, isn't there? Yeah. Rather than just trying to say, I'm fine, I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like we said, this is like hot button stuff. And I will tell you that the most difficult conversations that I've had is negotiating what the difference is between a VP and an SVP in the US. That group was no joke. Those people, and because, I mean, that's when you're really talking, it's power. It's power, it's money. And yeah, again, I'm an empathetic person and I absorb this to an extent. You kind of have to, but also obviously you keep up boundaries and things like this. But I was really turned around for a bit around that. And I would say that that's been the biggest challenge that I faced is like managing those conversations at that level can be quite intimidating. You have to really know your stuff.
Yeah. And I guess the thing is as well, that organizations are full of band-aids.
Yeah.
So when the organization started, there were no senior VPs. There were just VPs. And they said, well,
correct.
You can't be CEO and you can't be, we can make you a senior. And that's great. And then all of a sudden that becomes a thing, doesn't it? And another layer. And so it's, I guess it's real design, isn't it, that you're doing? Like,
so there was a conversation, is this a VP1 versus a VP2 versus an SVP1 versus an SVP2? And like literally, and like, it was such a good lesson learned, but we probably spent 2 months, the just energy being sucked as we're trying to figure this conversation out. And I think that now I would be able to say, hey, this is what needs to happen. And actually, I'm not supposed to be in the middle of this and making the decisions. This is really for the CEO and the COO to like come together. And I put forward a recommendation, all of that, like I knew. And it's crazy. It was a completely different level of the conversation that I've been having for over a decade. It was like, wow, this is just a whole different ballgame, basically.
You're touching on something which is just so fascinating, which is because what is our role? And people want to invite us into the role of judge, or they plonk us right in the middle, and that's not necessarily where we're most useful.
Right.
And we have to listen to ourselves. Then we go, well, this doesn't feel right. Am I in the right place? Am I going to take your invitation to be in the middle and try and sort this out? How do you know when you're not in the right place and you need to sort of maybe step aside, or there's something wrong about the process?
Yeah. I think in this case, there wasn't something wrong with the process, because the thing is you put the process in place, you put the governance in place. And for me, I have a very clear visual of what that looks like. In this case, I can tell you, we had our core project team, which was like doing the work. It was me and a couple of really fantastic right hands, basically like putting this process in place, doing the workshops, doing the facilitation. We had identified subject matter experts that would be brought into the conversation as needed, attending I think that they were weekly core team meetings. Then we had our steering committee, where we identified these are our real decision makers, and here's the executive sponsor who can kind of trump everybody else. That's how we did it. And I knew that my job was never as a decision maker. My job was to put a really clear and concise process in place with core milestones that we're all working toward together, and celebrating the success when we've achieved them, moving on to the next thing, bing, bang, boom. But what I'll say is, because these conversations are so intense and so just loaded and personal for people, I got caught up in the drama of it. And that's really easy to do. And imagine having these conversations without the process in place, without the governance in place. And that's often what people are doing. It makes perfect sense why you avoid this like the plague. This comes up a lot when you think about performance management. Managers can't give tough feedback, and they sort of just give them the pay bump or the next level up just to, do it. But it's the same sort of thing. Without the infrastructure and the education on how to have these conversations and recognize what your place is in the process, you can get turned around. So for me, my role is never as decision maker. It's always as facilitator and expert. And my job is to tee up the really sticky wicket questions and usually say, here's option A, B, maybe sometimes a C if it's really sticky. This is what I recommend. And I leave it to them. And I tell my teams, because they can get frustrated because they want to be more powerful. And I'm like, no, this is actually quite powerful. You can really set the stage, you can build the world for them, and you can put forward your recommendation. You're not the first one through the wall. That's a blessing. You're there as an advisor, right? And you really make that clear, because you also need the leaders to take ownership of this. It's not for you to be the scapegoat, which I think, by the way, also was happening when I was leading out these conversations in that forum. It's really easy to blame the consultant, to blame the external person coming in. And so being really clear, this is my role, and this project sponsor is your role.
So when you look back at your career so far, what would you say some of the biggest lessons you've learned are forward?
I think clarity is key. So you need to provide simple frameworks for people to follow. And because what happens is, without the framework, and I'm talking about a project plan is a framework is an example. So project management, critical. It's as important as change management. The project management, where you provide an infrastructure or a framework for people to operate inside of. That is crucial. It takes a bit of energy to stand that up. You have to know how to do it. But once that's in place, that's when the real conversations start to happen. People aren't going to start griping about not being included in a meeting, or not being aware of a certain decision being made, or not knowing what's coming next, or not. That's what usually the drama is around. If you can contain that and provide that structure for them, which is the how. We have the what, we have the why. Here's how we're going to make this transformation or this change happen, this evolution happen. Then that's where the real rich conversations start, because people can't use that as a scapegoat, and they can start to say, well, and I would say that within those infrastructures, within that framework, I like to always provide the clear governance, but clear checkpoints for people to check in. So I break down these big transformations into small digestible bites, phases, guys, but I think of it as little mini implementations, clear outputs and deliverables for each phase. But what's always really actually helped me get buy-in from leaders that are on the fence is to say, you, at the end of this, at this decision moment, you can actually say, I'm not comfortable moving forward. We can't move forward, and here's why. And that has always helped get them on board. So for me, it's clarity. It's creating simple frameworks for people to operate inside of. And from there, you can have the rich, sticky conversations where you don't have all of the answers, but you're not supposed to. You're supposed to facilitate that discussion and provide your expertise based on your experience, but you're not empowering the real decision makers to be leaders.
And you have such a multifaceted role, and sounds like there's a lifetimes of learning in it as well, and that you love to geek out on technical parts of the role as well. How do you actually invest in your own learning and development?
I've been better about it this year, you guys. I usually get really wrapped up in the work, and I'll tell you, Rupert Morrison is been a kind of guru in my mind. He's the author of a bunch of books, one of them being Data-Driven Organization Design. And so I read, and I usually read as I'm doing things. So I'm constantly kind of referencing, making sure that I'm tying things back to the latest best practice. So yeah, reading for sure. I've been doing a lot more networking and just connecting with people that are in this field, which has been fascinating because I kind of got into it on my own. It was sort of isolated, and I've been, my world has opened up recently. I've been really making connections with people in the space and hearing about their experiences and letting that color my own. So I would say reading and taking meetings at this point, but I think in the new year, I'm looking to do more conferences, do more webinars, things like this. You're constantly learning, and literally every client engagement, every project, you get better and better at it. And there's always a little nuance or something where you're absorbing something new and having to work through something new.
One of the reasons behind the podcast is to inspire the next generation of organization development and design practitioners coming through.
Yeah.
What advice would you give for someone who's actually either just at the foothills of your profession or is exploring your profession? What advice would you give?
You need to have both the technical and the people, the hard and the soft. So I would say find the thing that makes you super passionate. That's more on the technical side of things, and get really good at that. But the through line of everything is that you have to have really, really fantastic people skills and understand. It's that emotional intelligence piece. And I would say that it's the same thing when we look at, you can't have project management without having the change management expertise as well. Those two things together are what actually is gonna make you successful. It's very similar. So don't just focus on the soft. You need to have some hard skills to really break in and differentiate yourself. For me, just so happened to become job architecture, but it can be any number of things. And just find the thing that you're most passionate about and learn the ins and outs of it, and you will be a commodity.
Jules, I want to say huge thank you. It's been such a compelling,
so
interesting conversation. And you've just touched on some of the areas that we've really wanted to focus on throughout the seasons that we've been doing this. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
Oh, lots of things. I think I was drawn to the things you talked about at the beginning about how you kind of get buy-in, the importance of demonstrating value quickly and finding those quick wins and kind of being super practical and tactical. All of those things that are going to get you in. I love the definition of job architecture. I thought that was really clear and compelling for people. And I love the reading resource. So I always like a book to go in. So yes. I've jotted that down. That's on my reading list now.
There's a podcast episode that I've listened to probably 4 or 5 times, and I recommend it because it shows for me, it's Esther Perel's Where Should We Begin? I want to say. No, wrong. How's Work? That's her site, so other podcast. And it's this episode, I can put it in the link or whatever. Breaking News Has Broken Us. And she does just the most phenomenal job as a clinical therapist navigating this conversation. It's during COVID. It's with a newsroom, and everyone has these different unique problems. And she does the most amazing job zooming in, pulling back, providing the vocabulary for what people are experiencing. And so I would say Rupert Morrison is your technical guru. When I pull back and look more at the people piece, I'm obsessed with Esther Perel. But this episode in particular resonated so strongly with me. And I think it's just a really good example of what's possible within our role, how we could do something similar and facilitate a similar kind of conversation. So again, zoom out, zoom in, being able to do both is crucial.
Yeah, and I think the things that sort of stood out for me is all the things that Danny said. I think two things. So number one is making sure that ownership sits where it should. That not taking that seductive invitation to take it on yourself and say, look, you need to carry this and you need to take it with you as well. And also the fact that, if you have the courage and the conviction and the skill to lean into what is most difficult, then it just releases so much energy back into the system, doesn't it? And the fight is worth it, but you just need to make sure you've got the right people like yourself around to guide you through it, but don't let it stop you getting in the way as well. If anyone else like us has been absolutely riveted by this conversation and they want to follow your work, or they'd love to contact you and learn more about how job architecture or how you could guide them through transformation, what is the best way for people to reach you?
So I have an email address, jules@andesadvisory.co. Wish I had like a little sign I could hold up. Well, maybe we could put it in the chat. I don't know how this works, but something to show them it's .co, not .com, because I'm cool and hip.
Brilliant. And are you active on LinkedIn? Because that's how we...
Very active on LinkedIn.
We found your work on there, and we found some podcasts you're doing, which thought we had got to bring you on.
Yeah.
So you're active on there. People can follow you and connect with you on there as well.
Definitely. And please follow Andy's. We're moving and shaking. We're growing every day.
Well, thank you so much. What a brilliant episode.
Thank you.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Have you done it?
Yeah, very much so.
Amazing.
We made a promise when we started the OrgDev podcast where we would just literally bootstrap the first 50 episodes just to see if there was an audience that wanted to hear it. And we've completed 50 episodes now. And we've gone zooming past that. So we've now updated our technology. We're now on Riverside. We're now going to be making sure that we're putting clips out there, shorter clips of all the podcasts that we're doing. But if you found this podcast useful and you think someone that you know would really benefit from learning more about job architecture, then please share it with them and give them access to it. And if you want to keep up to date with all the podcasts that we're putting them out weekly at the moment, both in audio format and video. Then just subscribe to us on YouTube or on Buzzsprout, Danny, that's right, isn't it? And you'll find us on Amazon, Spotify, and all the others as well. But thank you so much. But most importantly, thank you so much, Jules. Thank you for making time at the end of a busy week to make time. And thank you for giving such brilliant explanations to such an important field.
Thank you so much. I had a blast. I'm excited to stay connected.
Thank you.